Hi guys, how are you guys doing today? I hope you guys are well. So I have to give a word of confirmation to many of you guys. This confirmed a lot for me as well, okay? So last night I was falling asleep and I started to see a vision of something, and this is pertaining to like my culture, like because I'm Jamaican, right? So this is pertaining to my culture, and the Lord was showing me something, and I was like, oh my gosh. And the Lord was showing me how, based on how we grow up, or even if you're not raised by your parents or raised by certain family members, just certain things culturally that you may be used to seeing people do or seeing your family do, it's very important that you discern what it is that you're coming into agreement with culturally, okay? Because when you're breaking a generational cycle or a generational curse, we have to understand something, that sometimes certain cycles or generational patterns, it doesn't only affect our bloodline and our family lineage, but certain patterns can affect, our culture, or certain patterns can affect our country or our city or our town, depending on where you're from, okay? And there's certain things that we have to make sure that we are not coming into agreement with. I'm going to give you guys some examples, okay? So I'm Jamaican, right? And there's certain things that, happens in our culture. Like, for instance, sometimes I remember seeing growing up, I would see people, like parents, when their babies are hiccuping, they would put a piece of string on the baby's forehead. Like, they would lick the string and put it on the baby's forehead, right? And they said that that's supposed to stop the hiccup, right? That is something that you don't come into agreement with. That is something that if you see people doing that from your culture, you're not supposed to repeat it, because that is a form of witchcraft, okay? Let's just say another thing. Culturally, let's just say that you grew up in a culture, a household, but in an overall culture where parents are, they have no problem talking to their children a certain type of way. Like, they have no problem telling their children, I'm gonna punch you. Or like in Jamaica, some parents, when they're yelling and telling their child to do something, they may say, I'm gonna thump you in your head, or I'm gonna box you. They'll say certain things like that. And that is something that can be repetitive, like as in, like, you'll see more than one household repeating things like this to their children, and it's a normal thing in the culture. But then when you go to another country, you notice that's not a normal thing, right? But then you also see how when the children grow up, they start repeating these cycles, they start repeating these, patterns, etc. Another thing that we have to be careful not to repeat, and these are just examples, but you will know more than me, like what's repetitive in your culture or your household or your bloodline versus, what is not okay and what's okay, basically, right? But another thing I noticed that happens, like, globally in many different countries, is some women, it's like they're being told that they have to stay with their partners even if their partners are abusive. That is something that is told to many people culturally, or it's just a cycle, right? So that's something that you also have to be careful not to come into agreement with. Another thing you have to be careful not to come into agreement with, and this is not culturally, but this is like something that is said worldwide. People always say, well, all men cheat, you know what I mean? And when you see people saying these things, like, you have to be careful not to come into agreement with that. Like, even yesterday I was scrolling through TikTok and I saw this is a Christian woman was saying basically how all men cheat. And she was saying, like, even pastors cheat, even prophets cheat. Like, she was basically saying, like, when you get married, you have to accept the fact that there's a possibility that your person's going to cheat, because your person does have flesh, and you have to be okay with that, even if it happens one time. And I'm like, why would any woman go into a marriage coming into agreement with that? Why would you want to come into agreement with something like that, right? So I scrolled past that because I'm like, I am not coming into agreement with that. But I'm just giving you that as an example, how, like, yes, there's certain things that's repetitively said and repetitively done worldwide, and people unknowingly come into agreement with it because they may agree with it, and they may think the same things, and it may not be positive things, but they're thinking the same things and they're literally accepting it, right? And then there's certain things that happen culturally that people don't even realize they're repeating. Another example, I know in some Caribbean countries, it's said that, when you're going into your home, late at night, you're supposed to turn around and go in backwards. Like, I'm giving you examples, like certain things you're just not supposed to come into agreement with. And if we are breaking generational patterns, generational curses, or even just patterns that has nothing to do with our generations, but in general, patterns that we may see in society and stuff, we have to be careful as to what we come into agreement with, because the Lord was showing me last night that some of these things are spirits. Some of the things that we unknowingly come into agreement with is we are accepting and we are taking on the spirits that are being transformed, that are being, continued down the bloodline or continued in generations and centuries, right? So we have to be careful not to come into agreement with certain things, okay? Just be mindful as to what you're doing, the patterns, what you hear, what you're listening to, what's being said, especially culturally, because culturally sometimes certain things seem normal because it's just a part of the culture. Like, you may go to your hometown or your city or your country and you may see something happen and you're like, okay, it doesn't faze me, it's normal, and you may come into agreement with that because you think it's normal, but it's actually not okay. You get what I'm saying? If you're breaking a generational curse, you can't come into agreement with anything that's going to taint the next generation, or that's going to taint your bloodline, especially when you are breaking free from these cycles and these spirits. Okay, I love you guys. I'll talk to you later. Bye.